Chapter 16, A Long Way Gone. It was infuriating to be told what to do by civilians. Their voices, even when they called us for breakfast, enraged me so much that I would punch the wall, my locker, or anything that I was standing next to. A few days earlier, we could have decided whether they would live or die. Because of these things, we refused to do anything that we were asked to do except eat. We had bread and tea for breakfast, rice and soup for both lunch and dinner. The assortment of soups consisted of cassava leaves, potato leaves, okra, and so forth. We were unhappy because we needed our guns and drugs. At the end of every meal, the nurses and staff members came to talk to us about attending the scheduled medical checkups in the mini hospital at Ben & Home and the one-on-one counseling sessions in the psychosocial therapy center that we hated. As soon as they started speaking, we would throw bowls, spoons, food, and benches at them. We would chase them out of the dining hall and beat them up. One afternoon, after we had chased off the nurses and staff members, we placed a bucket over the cook's head and pushed him around the kitchen until he burned his hand on a hot boiling pot and agreed to put more milk in our tea. Because of these things, we were basically left to wander aimlessly about our new environment for the entire first week. During that same week, the drugs were wearing off. I craved cocaine and marijuana so badly that I would roll a plain sheet of paper and smoke it. Sometimes I searched in the pockets of my army shorts, which I still wore, for crumbs of marijuana or cocaine. We broke into the mini hospital and stole some pain relievers, white tablets and off-white, and red and yellow capsules. We emptied the capsules, ground the tablets, and mixed them together. But the mixture didn't give us the effect we wanted. We got more upset day by day and as a result resorted to more violence. In the morning, we beat up people from the neighborhood who were on their way to fetch water at a nearby pump. If we couldn't catch them, we threw stones at them. Sometimes they dropped their buckets as they ran away from us. We would laugh as we destroyed their buckets. The neighbors stopped walking near our center as we had sent a few of them to the hospital. The staff members avoided us all the more. We began to fight each other day and night. We would fight for hours in between meals for no reason at all. During these fights, we destroyed most of the furniture and threw the mattresses out in the yard. We would stop to wipe the blood off our lips, arms, and legs only when the bell rang for mealtime. At night, after we had exhausted fighting, we would bring our mattresses outside in the yard and sit on them quietly until morning arrived and it was time for breakfast. Every time we returned from breakfast, the mattresses we brought outside the previous night were back on our beds. We would angrily bring them out again in the yard, cursing whoever had taken them inside. One night, as we sat outside on the mattresses, it began to rain. We sat in the rain, wiping it off our faces and listening to its sound on the tile roof and the gushing of torrents onto the ground. It rained for only about an hour, but even after it had stopped, we continued sitting outside all night on the wet sponges that were once our mattresses. The following morning, when we returned from breakfast, the mattresses were still outside. It wasn't much of a sunny day, so they didn't dry by nighttime. We became angry and went to look for Pape, the man in charge of storage. He was an ex-military man with a wandering eye. When we found him, we demanded dry mattresses. "You will have to wait for the ones you left outside to dry," he said. "We cannot allow a civilian to talk to us like that," someone said, and we all shouted in agreement and rushed at Pape. We unleashed blows on him. One of the boys stabbed his foot and he fell down. He put his hands over his head as we kicked him relentlessly and left him lying on the floor bleeding and unconscious. We shouted in excitement as we walked back to our veranda. Gradually, we became quiet. I was angry because I missed my squad and needed more violence. A security guy who watched the center took Pape to the hospital. Several days later, Pape returned during lunchtime, limping but with a smile on his face. "It is not your fault that you did such a thing to me," he said, as he strolled through the dining hall. This made us angry because we wanted the civilians, as we referred to the staff members, to respect us as soldiers who were capable of severely harming them. Most of the staff members were like that. They returned to smiling after we hurt them. It was as if they had made a pact not to give up on us. Their smiles made us hate them all the more. My hands had begun to shake uncontrollably and my migraines had returned with a vengeance. It was as if a blacksmith had an anvil in my head. I would hear and feel the hammering of metal in my head, and these unbearable sharp sounds made my veins and muscles sour. I cringed and rolled around on the floor by my bed or sometimes on the veranda. No one paid any attention, as everyone was busy going through their own withdrawal stages in different ways. Alwg, for example, punched the cement pillar of one of the buildings until his knuckles bled and his bone began to show. He was taken to the mini hospital and put to sleep for several days so that he would stop hurting himself. One day we decided to break the glass windows in the classrooms. I don't remember why, but instead of finding rocks to break the windows like everyone else, I punched the glass with my fist. I managed to break several panes before my hand got stuck in the glass. I drew it out and began to bleed uncontrollably. I had to go to the hospital. My plan was to steal a first aid kit and treat myself, but the nurse was there. She made me sit on the counter as she removed pieces of glass from my skin. She twisted her face whenever she was removing a piece of glass that was buried deep in my skin. But when she looked at me, I was still. She searched my face to see if I was in pain. She was confused, but continued to gently remove the pieces of glass from my bleeding hand. I didn't feel a thing. I just wanted to stop my blood from flowing. "This is going to hurt," the nurse said when she was about to clean the cuts. "What is your name?" she asked as she dressed my hand. I didn't answer her. "Come back tomorrow so that I can change the bandage, okay?" She began to rub my head, but I pushed her hand away and walked out. I didn't go back to the hospital the next day, but on that same day, I fainted from a migraine while I was sitting on the veranda. I woke up in bed in the hospital. The nurse was wiping my forehead with a soaked cloth. I caught her hand, pushed her away, and walked out again. I sat outside in the sun, rocking back and forth. My entire body was aching, my throat was dry, and I felt nauseated. I threw up something green and slimy and then fainted again. When I woke up hours later, the same nurse was there. She handed me a glass of water. "You can go if you want to, but I suggest staying in bed tonight," she said, pointing her finger at me the way a mother would talk to a stubborn child. I took the water from her and drank it, then threw the glass against the wall. The nurse leapt from her chair. I tried to get up to leave, but was unable to sit up in bed. She smiled and walked over to my bed and injected me. She covered me with a blanket and began sweeping up the broken glass. I wanted to throw the blanket off, but I couldn't move my hands. I was getting weaker, and my eyelids grew heavier. I woke to the whispers of the nurse and someone else. I was confused as I wasn't sure what day it was or what time it was. I felt my head pulsating a little. "How long have I been here?" I asked the nurse, banging my hand on the inside of the bed to get her attention. "Look who's talking, and be careful with your hand," she said. When I sat up a bit, I saw that there was a soldier in the room. I thought for a minute that he was there to take me back to the front lines. But when I looked at him again, I knew he was at the hospital for other reasons. He was clearly a city soldier, well-dressed and without a gun. He was a lieutenant and supposedly there to check on how we were being treated medically and psychologically, but he seemed more interested in the nurse. I was once a lieutenant, I thought. A junior lieutenant, to be precise. As a junior lieutenant, I had been in charge of a small unit made up of boys to carry out quick missions. The lieutenant and Corporal Gaddafi had selected all my remaining friends, Alhaji, Kanai, Juma, and Mariba, to form the unit, and once again we were back together. Only this time we weren't running away from the war. We were in it and went out scouting potential villages that had food, drugs, ammunition, gasoline, and other things we needed. I would report our findings to the corporal, and then my entire squad would attack the village we had spied on, killing everyone so that we would stay alive. On one of our scouting expeditions, we accidentally came upon a village. We had thought that the village was more than 3 days away, but after only a day and a half of walking, we began to smell the scent of cooking palm oil in the air. It was a beautiful day as summer was giving us its last sunshine. We immediately got off the path and walked in the bushes toward the village. When we began to see the thatched roofs, we crawled until we were closer to the village, only to be able to look at what was going on. There were a few gunmen lazily lounging about. Also, there were piles of bundles outside every house. It seemed as if the rebels were getting ready to move out of that village. If we had gone back to base to get the rest of the squad, we would have missed capturing their supply of food. So we decided to attack. I gave orders for everyone to deploy around the village at strategic positions from where they could see the entire place. Alhaji and I gave 3 other boys a few minutes to take their positions before we started crawling even closer to the village to initiate the attack. The 2 of us went back to the main path and started crawling on either side of it. We had 2 RPG tubes and 5 propelled grenades. We had gotten close enough, and I had aimed my gun at the group that I intended to start with when Alhaji tapped me on my shoulder. He whispered that he wanted to practice his Rambo moves before we started firing. Before I said a word, Alhaji was already rubbing mud on his face, using a combination of saliva and some of the water from his backpack to wet the mud. He tied his gun to his back and took out his bayonet. Rubbing his finger on the flat edge, holding it in front of his face, he began to crawl slowly under the midday sun that illuminated the village one last time before we brought darkness to it. When Alhaji was out of sight, I aimed the RPG at the village where most of the gunmen sat to cover him. A few minutes later, I saw him crawling and crouching behind and among the bush houses. He would quickly sit against the walls to avoid being seen. He crawled slowly behind a lazy guard basking in the sunlight with his gun on his lap. Alhaji grabbed the guard's mouth and sliced his neck with his bayonet. He did the same to a few more guards. But he had made one mistake. He didn't hide the bodies of those he had successfully killed. I was enjoying his maneuver when one of the guards, upon returning to his post, saw the body of his colleague and began running back to tell the others. I couldn't let him do that, so I shot him with my G3 and quickly released 2 RPGs among the gunmen. We began exchanging fire. I didn't know where Alwg was, but as I was shooting, he crawled toward me. I almost shot him, but recognized his dirty Rambo face. We went to work, killing everyone in sight. We didn't waste a single bullet. We had all gotten better at shooting, and our size gave us an advantage because we could hide under the tiniest bushes and kill men who wondered where the bullets were coming from. To gain complete control of the village, Alwg and I shot the remaining RPGs before we descended on it. We walked around the village and killed everyone who came out of the houses and huts. Afterward, we realized that there was no one to carry the loads. We had killed everyone. So I sent Kenai and Mariba back to the base to get help. They left, taking some ammunition from the dead gunmen. Some of them still clung to their guns. The 3 of us remained in the village. Instead of sitting among the dead bodies, the bundles of food, crates of ammunition, and bags of drugs, we took cover in the nearby bushes and guarded the village. Also, we took turns going down to the village to get something to eat and some drugs. We sat quietly under the bushes and waited. 2 days later, Kenai and Mariba returned with the corporal, some soldiers, and civilians who carried the bundles of food, drugs, and ammunition back to the base. We have enough of everything to last us for a few months. Good job, soldiers, the corporal congratulated us. We saluted him and were on our way. Because of this raid, Alwg acquired the name Little Rambo, and he did all he could in other raids to live up to that name. My nickname was Green Snake because I would situate myself in the most advantageous and sneaky position and would take out a whole village from under the tiniest shrub without being noticed. The lieutenant gave me the name. He said, "You don't look dangerous, but you are, and you blend with nature like a green snake, deceptive and deadly when you want to be." I was happy with my name, and on every raid I made sure I did as my name required. There was a crack on the white ceiling of the room, and I could faintly hear the deep voice of the city lieutenant and the quick laughs of the nurse. I turned my head to the side and looked in their direction. The nurse had a wide smile on her face and seemed to be interested in the lieutenant's jokes. I got up and started walking out of the hospital. "Drink a lot of water and you will be fine. Come back tomorrow night for a checkup," the nurse called after me. "How do you like being here?" the lieutenant asked. I looked at him with disgust and spat on the ground. He shrugged. Just another sissy city soldier, I thought as I walked back to the hall. When I got there, 2 boys were playing table tennis on the veranda. Everyone seemed to be interested in what was happening. It had been more than a month, and some of us had almost gone through the withdrawal stage, even when there were still instances of vomiting and collapsing at unexpected moments. These outbreaks ended for most of us at the end of the 2nd month, but we were still traumatized, and now that we had time to think, the fastened mantle of our war memories slowly began to open. Whenever I turned on the tap water, all I could see was blood gushing out. I would stare at it until it looked like water before drinking or taking a shower. Boys sometimes ran out of the hall screaming, "The rebels are coming." Other times, the younger boys sat by rocks weeping and telling us that the rocks were their dead families. Then there were those instances when we would ambush the staff members, tie them up, and interrogate them about the whereabouts of their squad and where they got their supplies of arms and ammunition, drugs, and food. It was also during this time that we were given school supplies, books, pens, and pencils, and told that we would have classes from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. on weekdays. We made campfires with them, and the next morning another set of supplies was handed to us. We burned them again. The staff members kept resupplying the school materials. This time they didn't say, "It's not your fault," as they usually did after we had done things they considered wrong and not childlike. One afternoon, after the staff members had set some school supplies on the veranda, Mambu suggested that we sell them. "Who will buy them? Everyone is afraid of us," some of the boys asked. "We can find a trader who wants to do business," Mambu assured the boys. We loaded the supplies in plastic bags, and 6 of us went to the nearest market where we sold them to a vendor. The man was excited and told us that he would buy from us any time. "I don't care whether you stole this. I have the money and you have the goods. We do business," the man told us as he handed Mambu a wad of cash. Mambu counted the crisp notes with a wide smile on his face. He held the bills to our noses so that we could smell them. "This is good money, I can tell," he said. We then ran back to the center to make it in time for lunch. Immediately after we finished eating, Mambu gave each boy his share of the money. The halls became noisy as everybody talked about what they were going to do with their money. This was definitely more exciting than burning the supplies. While some of the boys bought Coca-Cola, toffee, and other such things with their money, Mambu, Alwg, and I planned a trip to Freetown. All we knew was that we had to take public transportation to the city center. That morning, we gulped our breakfast and the dining hall one at a time. I pretended I was going for a checkup at the mini hospital. Mambu went into the kitchen as if to get more food and climbed out the window. Alwg walked toward the latrine. We didn't want the other boys to know, as we were worried that they would all come along and the staff would panic. The three of us met at the junction down by the center and stood in line waiting for the bus. "Have you ever been to the city?" Alwg asked us. "No," I replied. "I was supposed to come to Freetown for school, but then the war came. I heard it's a beautiful city," Alwg said. "Well, we'll find out soon enough. The bus is here," Mambu announced. Suku's music was blasting inside the bus, and people were chatting loudly as if at a marketplace. We sat in the back and watched the houses and kiosks go by. A man standing in the aisle began to dance to the music. Then a few passengers, including Mambu, joined in. We laughed and clapped for the dancers. We got off the bus on Kissy Street, a busy area near the heart of the city. People were hurriedly going about their days as if nothing were happening in the country. There were big shops on both sides of the street, and vendors crowded the tiny sidewalks. Our eyes feasted on everything, and we were quickly overwhelmed. "I told you it would be great," Mambu jumped in the air. "Look at that tall building." I pointed at one. "And that one is so tall," Alwg called out. "How do people get up there?" Mambu asked. We walked slowly, admiring the number of cars, the Lebanese shops filled with all kinds of goods. My neck was hurting just from looking at the tall buildings. There were many markets everywhere, selling clothes, food, cassettes, stereos, and many other things. The city was too noisy, as if people were having arguments everywhere simultaneously. We wandered about all the way to the cotton tree, a national symbol of Sierra Leone and the landmark of the capital. We stared open-mouthed at the huge tree that we had seen only on the back of currency. We now stood under it at the intersection of Sayaka Stevens Street and Pademba Road, the center of the city. Its leaves were green, but the bark looked very old. "No one will believe us when we tell them this," Alwg said as we walked away. We walked around all day buying ice cream and Vimto drinks. The ice cream was difficult to enjoy as it melted too quickly under the hot sun. I spent most of my time licking the sticky residue on my elbows and between my fingers instead of eating it from the cone. As we walked around the city center, the numbers of people and cars increased. We knew no one, and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. Mambu and Alwg walked behind me the whole time and consulted with me about which way to proceed, when to stop. It seemed as if we were still in the front line, and I was their squad leader. It was almost evening, and we had to return to the center in time for dinner. As we walked back to catch the bus, we realized that we didn't have the money to pay the fare. "We should sit in front, and when we get to our stop, we can jump off and run away," Mambu told us. We quietly sat on the bus, eyeing the apprentice, the conductor, who collected the fare before every stop. When the bus was about to reach our destination, the apprentice asked those getting off to raise their hands. He walked down the aisle collecting money. Then the bus stopped, and the apprentice stood at the doorway to make sure that no one got out without paying. I walked toward him, my hand in my pocket as if I was pulling out the cash. Then I shoved him to the side, and we ran away laughing. He chased us for a bit and then gave up. That night, we told all the boys about the tall buildings in the city, the noise, the cars, and the markets. Everyone was excited and wanted to go to the city after that. The staff had no choice but to arrange weekend trips to the city center so that we would stop going on our own. But that wasn't enough for some of us who wanted the city more than once a week.